Hello and welcome to today's episode. I want to start with a bold statement. 99% of people are learning English the wrong way. Yes, you heard that right. Maybe you're one of them. Maybe you've been studying English for years, watching movies with subtitles, memorizing vocabulary lists, taking classes, or even buying expensive courses. But when the time comes to actually speak, your words freeze. You translate in your head, your sentences sound unnatural, and your confidence disappears. Does this sound familiar? If it does, don't worry. You're not broken. You're not bad at languages. You've simply been using methods that were never designed to make you fluent. In this episode, I'm going to share 10 powerful tips that will help you break free from what I call subtitle English and start speaking naturally, confidently, and fluently. And here's the good news. These tips are not just theories. They are practical, proven strategies that I've seen work for thousands of learners. If you apply them step by step, your English will change. So grab a notebook or just listen carefully because this might be the turning point in your English journey. Let's dive in. Chapter 1, the subtitle trap. Before we get into the tips, let's talk about the trap most learners fall into. Think about the last time you watched a movie in English. Chances are, you turned on subtitles in your native language. You told yourself, this way I can understand everything. And it felt safe, right? You could follow the story. You can understand the jokes. You didn't feel lost. But here's the problem. Your brain wasn't practicing English. It was reading your own language. Instead of listening actively, you were relying on translation. This is what I call the subtitle trap. It gives you the illusion of learning. You feel like you're immersed in English, but in reality, you're training your brain to depend on your mother tongue. It's like going to the gym and just watching other people lift weights. You feel like you're in the right place, but your muscles aren't growing. So here's the first big lesson. Understanding English is not the same as producing English. Most learners are good at understanding when they read or listen, but when it's time to speak, they realize they never trained their speaking muscles. And that brings us to our first practical tip. Chapter 2, tip number 1. Ditch the subtitles gradually. Now, I'm not saying you should throw away subtitles forever, but if you want to break free from subtitle English, you need to reduce your dependence on them. Here's how to do it step by step. Stage 1. Switch to English subtitles. If you've been watching everything with subtitles in your language, the first step is to make them English only. This way, your brain connects the spoken word with the written English. 2. Stage 2. Selective subtitles. Pick short clips, maybe 2 or 3 minutes long. Watch once with subtitles, then watch again without. Challenge yourself to catch the meaning without relying on the text. 3. Stage 3. No subtitles at all. Start with shows or podcasts where the language is clear and simple. Children's shows, documentaries, or even YouTube channels made for learners are great options. Over time, push yourself to watch more complex content. Movies, dramas, even fast-paced conversations. The key here is progressive training. Don't jump from always subtitles to no subtitles overnight. That's like trying to lift 100 kilograms on your first day at the gym. You'll fail and feel discouraged. But if you build the habit step by step, your listening skills will explode. you'll start to hear the rhythm of English, the way native speakers connect words, and you'll stop translating every sentence in your head. And that's when speaking becomes easier, because your brain is finally thinking in English. Chapter 3, tip number 2, speak before you're ready. This is going to sound scary, but it's one of the most powerful tips I can give you. Speak before you feel ready. Most learners wait. They say, I'll start speaking when my grammar is better, when I know more vocabulary, when I feel confident. But here's the truth. You'll never feel ready. Confidence doesn't come first. It comes after practice. Think about learning to swim. You can read books about swimming, watch YouTube tutorials, and even memorize every stroke. But until you jump in the water, you can't swim. It's the same with English. You can study grammar for 10 years, but if you don't open your mouth, you'll never speak fluently. So how do you practice speaking if you don't have native speakers around you? Here are 3 practical ways. 1. Shadowing. This means listening to a native speaker, maybe in a podcast, movie, or YouTube video, and repeating immediately. Imitating their tone, rhythm, and pronunciation. Don't worry about understanding every word. Focus on sounding natural. 2. Self-talk. Narrate your life in English. For example, I'm making coffee. I'm checking my email. I need to go to the store. It feels silly at first, but it trains your brain to think in English. 3. Voice recording. Record yourself speaking about a topic for 1 or 2 minutes. Then listen back. You'll notice mistakes, but you'll also notice progress. And over time, your fluency will grow. Remember this, fluency is a skill, not a subject. You don't learn fluency by reading about it. You build fluency by speaking, even when it's messy, even when it's broken, even when you're afraid. So stop waiting. Speak now. Chapter 4, tip number 3. Focus on phrases, not words. One of the biggest mistakes learners make is studying English like a dictionary. They try to memorize individual words: apple, beautiful, quickly, opportunity. But when they open their mouth, they don't know how to put those words together. Why? Because English is built on chunks, not single words. Think about how native speakers talk. We don't say, I will contact you in the future. We say, I'll get back to you. We don't say, I am very tired. We say, I'm worn out. These are not just words. They're phrases, expressions, and patterns that carry meaning. So instead of memorizing words, start collecting phrases you can actually use. Here's how to do it. 1. Listen actively. When you hear a useful phrase, pause and repeat it. For example, that makes sense. 2. Write it down. Keep a notebook or digital list of ready-made phrases. 3. Use it immediately. Don't just write it. Say it in your own sentences. Example, that makes sense to me. Yes. Your explanation makes sense. Within a few weeks, you'll notice your English starts to sound more natural. Instead of building sentences word by word like Lego bricks, you'll have ready-made blocks you can drop into conversation. That's what native speakers do, and that's why they sound fluent. Chapter 5, tip number 4. Stop obsessing over grammar. Now, don't get me wrong. Grammar is important. It gives structure to the language. But here's the secret. Fluency comes before accuracy. If you wait until your grammar is perfect, you'll never speak. And honestly, native speakers don't even use perfect grammar in everyday conversation. Think about it. Have you ever heard someone say, "I ain't got no money"? "She don't know." "Gonna grab some food." These are all grammatically wrong, but they're natural in real life. The goal is not to speak like a textbook. The goal is to communicate. Here's what I recommend. Focus on communication first. If you can express your idea, that's success. Notice grammar in context. Instead of memorizing rules, observe how native speakers naturally use tenses and structures. Correct slowly. Over time, improve your grammar by reading, listening, and practicing. But don't let it stop you from speaking today. Remember, people will forgive grammar mistakes, but they won't forgive silence. Chapter 6. Tip number 5. Listen more than you study. Here's another truth. Listening is the fuel of fluency. Most learners spend hours studying textbooks, but very little time listening to real English. As a result, they don't develop an ear for the language. Listening is crucial because it does 3 things. 1. It trains your brain to understand speed, rhythm, and connected speech. 2. It gives you natural input, real expressions, not artificial textbook sentences. 3. It improves your pronunciation because you can only produce the sounds you can hear clearly. So how do you make listening a daily habit? Podcasts. Find podcasts on topics you enjoy. Even if you understand only 60%, keep listening. Audiobooks. Pair an audiobook with the written text. Read and listen at the same time to strengthen comprehension. Background listening. Play English while cooking, cleaning, or commuting. Even passive exposure helps your brain absorb patterns. And here's a powerful technique: repeated listening. Don't just listen once and move on. Pick one short clip and listen multiple times until it feels natural. This deep training is much more effective than consuming endless new material. The more you listen, the more you'll internalize the music of English. And when you speak, that music will flow out naturally. Chapter 7. Tip number 6. Read aloud every day. Reading silently is good for vocabulary, but if you want to speak fluently, you need to read out loud. Why? Because reading aloud trains 3 essential skills at once. 1. Pronunciation. You get to practice the sounds of English consistently. 2. Rhythm and intonation. You start to hear the melody of English, where voices rise and fall. 3. Confidence. You get comfortable using your voice in English without pressure. Here's a simple daily exercise. Pick a short article, a dialogue, or even a page from a book. Read it slowly, paying attention to clarity. Then, read it again faster, trying to sound natural. Bonus step: record yourself and compare with a native speaker reading the same text. Even 10 minutes a day can transform the way you sound. Over time, your speaking will become smoother, clearer, and more confident. Chapter 8. Tip number 7. Learn to pause, not panic. Here's something most learners don't realize. Fluent speakers pause. Think about it. Native speakers don't speak in one endless stream of words. They stop, think, and use fillers like, well, you know, actually, let me think. Pauses are not mistakes. They are tools. The problem is, many learners panic when they forget a word. They freeze, their face turns red, and they give up. But in reality, nobody expects perfect, non-stop speech. So instead of panicking, learn to buy time naturally. For example, that's a good question. How should I put this? What I mean is, these little phrases give your brain a few seconds to catch up while keeping the conversation alive. So remember, fluency is not about speed, it's about flow. And flow includes pauses. Chapter 9, Tip number 8, make English part of your identity. If English is just a subject you study, you'll always struggle. But if English becomes part of who you are, fluency will come naturally. Think about people who move abroad. Many of them become fluent not because they study harder, but because English becomes part of their daily lives. So how can you do this without moving to another country? 1. Change your environment. Switch your phone, apps, and social media to English. 2. Think in English. Start with small sentences in your head like, "Where are my keys?" or "I need to buy bread." 3. Express emotions in English. When you're happy, frustrated, or excited, say it in English. Connect the language with your feelings. When English becomes part of your identity, you stop being a student of English and start being an English user. That shift changes everything. Chapter 10, Tip number 9, consistency beats intensity. Here's a common mistake. Learners study for 3 hours once a week and then do nothing for 6 days. That doesn't work. Language learning is not a sprint. It's like watering a plant. If you water it once a week for 3 hours, it will die. But if you give it a little water every day, it will grow. The same is true with English. 15 minutes daily is more powerful than 2 hours once a week. So here's the key. Set small goals. For example, I will shadow English for 5 minutes today. Create routines. Link English to habits you already have. Listen to a podcast while brushing your teeth, or read aloud after breakfast. Track progress. Use a journal or app to check off daily practice. Small wins build momentum. Consistency builds fluency brick by brick, and those bricks become a solid wall of confidence. Chapter 11, Tip number 10, find joy in the process. Finally, the most important tip of all, enjoy the journey. Too many learners treat English like punishment. They force themselves through boring textbooks, memorize endless word lists, and then wonder why they quit. But here's the truth. You don't quit what you love. So find ways to make English fun. Watch shows you genuinely enjoy. Read books, blogs, or comics that make you curious. Join online communities about your hobbies in English. Celebrate small victories. Did you have a 2-minute conversation today? That's amazing. When you love the process, fluency becomes a side effect. Conclusion. Let's recap. Most learners fall into the subtitle trap. They focus too much on understanding and not enough on producing. But if you want to break free and speak fluently, you need to 1. Ditch the subtitles gradually. 2. Speak before you feel ready. 3. Focus on phrases, not words. 4. Stop obsessing over grammar. 5. Listen more than you study. 6. Eat aloud every day. 7. Learn to pause, not panic. 8. Make English part of your identity. 9. Be consistent, not extreme. 10. Find joy in the process. Fluency is not about perfection. It's about communication, confidence, and connection. And the moment you stop waiting for the right time and start using English today, that's the moment you truly begin to grow. So here's my challenge for you. After this episode, take one tip and apply it immediately. Don't just listen, do it. Speak out loud. Shadow a podcast. Write down a phrase and use it today. Because fluency is not a dream, it's a practice, and you're ready. Thank you for joining me in this episode. If you found these tips helpful, share this podcast with a friend who's also learning English. And remember, you are capable of more than you think. Keep going, keep speaking, and soon you'll realize you're no longer trapped in subtitle English. You're living in real English.